Okay, well, hello everybody. So welcome to our second thought leadership event on the future of workforce and talent. I'm Clemmy Smith. I'm Deputy Director for HR and Workforce Services at Crown Commercial Service. So that's a commercial role I should highlight as part of the kind of CCS world. I'm also joined here today by a few of my colleagues. So I should just mention Charlotte Ward. She works in my team heading up our public sector resourcing agreement. So she may well kind of come in later on some of the questions and so on. And there are also a couple of others from my team here as well today, I think. So welcome everybody else. It's great to see so many people joining today. I think we're up to about 65, which is fantastic. The idea of these kind of sessions was to bring people together from across different departments, public sector organisations, into a conversation around talent and workforce, and particularly around strategic workforce planning. So as we know, departments are facing increased focus on their use of resources at the moment, and it's expected that there'll be a greater emphasis on strategic workforce planning and data analysis relating to both external and internal resourcing options to allow departments to maintain flexibility and efficiency. In this context, managing contingent labour and external resources effectively is going to become a really critical component of your broader workforce strategy. We know departments are likely to be encouraged to adopt best practices in sourcing required skills and talent, ensuring that you utilise the most efficient routes to attract and then retain skilled individuals. And of course, that holistic approach will not only optimise your workforce capabilities, but it's also going to support your operational resilience in what we know is going to be an ever-evolving public sector landscape. So as we reflect on the key takeaways from our first roundtable in January, which hopefully some of you were able to attend, and we did send out some information after that. So, hopefully lots of you saw that. If not, and you are interested, please do let us know and we can send you out some information from that first session. But we really talked a lot about in that session around laying the strong foundations for successful workforce planning. So we talked about the importance of data in understanding your current landscape, identifying skills gaps, and then obviously anticipating future needs as well. And that discussion, and it was a really rich discussion in the session, highlighted the necessity for organisations to adopt a multifaceted approach, integrating hiring, training, retraining and redeployment to build the workforce that you need. And, we see that approach as really kind of important to help us, all as organisations to be more adaptable and innovative in our workforce strategies. So the idea today, and we've got a great panel, which I know Melanie and others are going to introduce in a second, but we've kind of focused today really on building on those insights from the first session and diving a bit deeper into the build, buy, borrow approach to skills and talent. And, as I think we're all aware, that's really going to be a key part of our effective workforce planning going forward. So hopefully today we can kind of bring you a few insights and kind of our different panel members can raise some ideas that'll, help us all to kind of think about that strategic planning and that kind of build, buy, borrow concept. So without any further ado, I will hand over, and it's Mel, it is you I'm handing over to, I think, isn't it?
It is, Claire. Well done. Pass the baton. Thank you.
Pass you over. Thank you.
So welcome everyone. Just a quick intro from myself. So I'm Mel Barnett and I'm the Managing Director of Public Sector Resourcing. And equally, like Clemmy was saying, before we dive into today's session, I just wanted to take a moment also just to set the scene in terms of what the panel will bring to life today. So firstly, the main topic of today is age inclusion considerations. And we consider these need to be high up on the agenda when it comes to your strategic workforce plans, because attracting, engaging and retaining over 50s talent is really key to harness the potential of the generation that still has so much more to contribute. And a few stats here. The UK is an ageing society, and by 2030, 47% of our population will actually be over 50. So therefore, tapping into that older talent is essential for growing workforce shortages amidst declining birth rates and an increase in life expectancy. 70% of women aged 50 want to actually power up their careers, and that includes myself. Contrary to many beliefs, ageist assumptions can seriously hinder business performance, making training and awareness absolutely critical. And data from Gartner shows 288% uplift of financial performance when organisations intentionally combine the experience, aka over 50s, with innovation from younger age groups. Government's Economic Affairs Committee recently launched an inquiry that we put a paper in, myself and Lindsay and the teams, to investigate the impact of ageing on the UK economy and the society and the workforce, and the opportunities and challenges that government need to consider when the demographic trend and the policies necessary to adapt to this future state. And in addition, another challenge faced by government departments in developing and delivering strategic workforce plans, recognising headcount challenges versus the need for skills. Public sector headcount restrictions often clash with recruitment efforts. And we offer in PSR the recruit, train, deploy model. And this is a strategy for addressing skills gaps and attracting diverse talent. This offers so much potential as a reduced turnover, increased retention and cost-effective training, amongst other benefits. And while headcount restrictions may limit the number of new hires, RTD actually enables departments to reap long-term rewards from this investment compared to traditional or less cost-effective routes to talent. This route garners some impressive statistics when you think about your strategic workforce plans. So RTD post-permanent promotions, employees who go through these programs tend to have a higher promotion rate. Studies indicate that RTD participants are 30% more likely to be promoted in the first 2 years. And conversion rates, the conversion from RTD programs to permanent positions, is also really impressive. On average, 70% of RTD trainees secure permanent roles within the organisations they're deployed to. And that stat jumps to 81% for PSR RTD cohorts. So these stats can really serve to highlight the effectiveness of the RTD model in not only filling immediate skills gaps, but also fostering a long-term growth and stability within the public sector. So you're not here to hear from me today. Without further ado, let me make some formal introductions. I am delighted to introduce the chair for this morning's session. That's our wonderful Paul Modley, who's our Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging at AMS. Paul is a visionary leader with a wealth of experience in driving inclusive practices and fostering a culture of belonging within organisations. And his innovative approach, dedication to diversity, has also been instrumental in shaping AMS's own commitment to creating opportunities for underrepresented talent and promoting social mobility. In addition, we're very fortunate to have two distinguished panellists with us today. Sonia Unstead, who is the lead for Government Digital and Data Capability at the Office of National Statistics, ONS. And Sonia's responsible for building talent pipelines into digital data roles and supporting the ongoing career and skills development of people once in post. Sonia will share insights into the ONS's decision to create the talent they needed through their organisation. She will discuss how they overcame barriers to implementing the recruit, train, deploy model and how these efforts have supported diversity outcomes in their workforce. And finally, but by no means least, Lindsay Simpson. Lindsay is the founder and CEO of 55 Redefined, and 55 Redefined, the leading authority on age inclusion in the workplace. Lindsay will highlight the benefits of having a diverse age range in your workforce. She will specifically address how to engage and utilise the often overlooked talent pool of workers over 50. The solution to your future skills and talent needs might already be within your own organisation. So let's embrace this opportunity, rethink traditional workforce strategies, and take bold, forward-thinking actions to shape the future of our workforce. Mr. Modley, over to you.
What an intro. Thank you, Mel. What an intro. Right, good morning, everybody. I've got the easy bit. I get to chair this wonderful panel. We want this to be participative. We want to get your input, your involvement. So to start that, I don't know many of you. I'd love you just to put in the chat which departments you're representing, where you're based in the UK, just to say hello, so we can get a feel for who is on the call. So I've got a series of questions that I'm going to ask Lindsay initially. So Sonia, you can relax a little bit. We'll have 30 minutes with Lindsay and then 30 minutes with Sonia, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. But please, as we go through, if you've got particular questions, then pop them in the chat, and if they're relevant to what we're talking about, then I'll bring them into the conversation. So Kaz, thank you for getting us going. Kaz from the Ministry of Justice. So let's get some more input from other participants. I've got some polls as well, which we'll be referring to as we go through. So hopefully we're going to keep it pacey, keep it engaging, and we'll go from there. So Lindsay, we're ready for this.
Perfect.
Right, my first question, and I feel like I've asked you this many times before, why do we need to rethink the over 50s? Why does this matter? And why has it become a boardroom conversation? Sorry, a few questions in one there.
Oh, that's perfect, Paul. And hi, everybody. To those of you I've not met before, I am indeed an ageaholic. I am obsessed with unlocking the opportunity that comes from our ageing population, rather than seeing it as this critical threat to society and economies. And I fundamentally believe that all of us here have within our power to make some changes, not only to our own futures, but to the organisations that we participate in, to make that a reality. But this is a global megatrend. So when we talk about the 6 global megatrends, you might kind of leap to AI or sustainability and climate. But actually, our ageing population is one of those 6, and it's impacting every country, every company, every organisation, every economy, and every human on the planet. I'm going to give you some statistics that might blow your mind. And obviously, all of these are fact-checked, given my esteemed panellist is from the Office of National Statistics. So everything is fact-checked here. But in the last century alone, we've added 30 healthy years to life expectancy, which is mind-blowing. It's the greatest gain in life expectancy since mankind became a thing. And so in that 100 years, a lot has changed. We invented this concept of retirement post-war. It was meant to be a 2-3 year gig of supporting ex-service people who'd committed in wartime. It was never meant to be a 30 to 40 year stint of life, which didn't involve work and purpose. And so what happened with those 30 years is we have improved healthcare and medication and everything that shows that a 70-year-old today is physically and mentally has the same acuity as the 50-year-old did just a single generation ago. So for those of you, and I can't see your lovely faces, but if you're in your 50s or beyond, you physically and mentally are nothing like your parent. You don't dress like them, you don't think like them, you don't want the same things as them, you don't want cliff edge careers like them, you don't want to go and do some gardening and some childcare as your only sole purpose. But the world of work hasn't quite caught up. And so this 65 age notion of retirement that was invented a century ago hasn't shifted forward with the 30 years. In fact, it hasn't even really shifted forward 5 to 10 years. So we have this aging population. But what that then means, if we then look beneath that, is something that Mel alluded to in her intro, which is that we have a shrinking birth rate. So one of the statistics that we should all know and recognise is something called the replacement rate. So we need a replacement rate in the UK and in every other economy of 2.1. So we need 2.1 children to be born for every adult female. And in the UK, we've now just dropped to 1.4. So we have a shrinking overall population. And we have a fast shrinking youth work population, which means if we forecast forward and if we looked at, say, Western Europe here for the next 20 years, The working age population is going to shrink by 25%, whilst our over 60s grows at over 40% in the exact same time horizon. So we have an economy that used to be shaped like a triangle. So our older population that were dependent at the top, and then we had a middle life, and then we had all of these babies being born underneath. And my family tree is an exact replica of this, and this is represented around the world. So my granddad is one of 12 siblings. He had then 5 children, my mum Barbara being one of those. My mum then had 2 children, me and my brother Darren, and I'm 47, level 47. I like to talk about ages in levels. I'm level 47, and I don't have any children. And so what's happening is that our economies and our population used to be like this. They are now very firmly like this as we're entering an era of 50-50, 50% over 50, 50% under 50. But in very short order, it will be an inverse triangle as our over 50s dominate our population. And so that going back to your question, Paul, around why is this occupying boardrooms? Why is this occupying economies? Why is this occupying government? Because if we don't enable people to work longer and save more for their longer lives, then quite frankly, we're all screwed. So we have to fix this opportunity. And we're seeing that the countries that are falling behind, so France and the US, for example, were downgraded about 18 months ago from their AAA status to AA by Moody's and Standard & Poor's because of their country's inability to respond to a working population. So the largest employer in the UK is the public sector, and it is, by my definition of working with over 95 global corporates, from Amazon to Diageo to Barclays to HSBC, by our definition, you are way off the pace as an employer around how do you embrace people to work into their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, and beyond. And so over the course of this call and some of these questions, which Paul, I'm looking forward to you asking me, and also you broadly, as we dig into the topic, there are ways to solve for this that work for the individual, that work for you as an organisation, but importantly, mirror the population that we are all serving, whether you're in a business that's selling to consumers or whether you're in a public departments delivering services to the population. With that skew to age, means that we have to represent our organisations to skew and mirror that age of our population.
Lindsay, some of those stats are just astounding, and they just really make you think, don't they, in terms of what's coming. You have been really successful in kind of getting into boardrooms to talk to boards, C-suite directors, and linking this to growth. And you've and I've heard you say this many times, if you don't have an age strategy, you don't have a growth strategy. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Exactly that. So given we know that the only native growing element of our population is the over 50s, that's the only one that's organically, and we're seeing this, obviously, I know a big percentage of your workforce will be contingent labour. So a couple of stats for you around that is that back in 2022, the ONS reported that 48% of the UK's freelance contractor and self-employment workforce were over 50, which was an 18% growth in just 10 years, whilst the under 50s is consistently shrinking year on year. So even within our contingent labour force, it is the growing population. But if we then think about the populations that we're serving, so we also have a dynamic around wealth. So in the UK, 75% of the wealth is held by 50 to 70-year-olds. So we have a situation where if you're a corporate organisation that's trying to deliver and sell services, be they banking or spirits, if you're Diageo, or consumer products, if you're Amazon, then if you don't lean in to what the products are, the services are, the changing needs, the changing requirements around how people want to be dealt with from a services perspective, then you're missing out on serving the only growth population and what is going to be the majority element of our population. But what's interesting, Paul, is that we do work with such a variety of organisations, but none of them ring us to say we'd really like to solve ageism. None of us, I've never had the call that says, can we just be really nice to older people? Strangely enough, that's not how organisations and boards run their businesses. They all look at ROI, they all looking at what's the impact. And what we're seeing is that this shift from looking at ROI to ROE. So ROI is what you'll all, I'm sure, be familiar with. What's the return on investment? So if we were going to invest in one of AMS's recruit, train and deploy program, what's the return on that investment that we're going to get in terms of a sustainable skills pipeline or reduced attrition, etc.? What's the ROI? ROE is return on experience. So this is what we're seeing in corporates that are then starting to understand actually what's the great, if we just don't look at salary, but we look at what do we get from our workforce by age, what does that tell us? And I'm going to give you a couple more data points here, which again might blow your mind a little bit, and certainly they do of the boards when we dig into their data across their organisations. So when we start to look at workforces by age, we see some real skewing towards the benefits of older workers. So for example, an over 50s employee is 200% less likely to take a day off work sick than an under 30s employee. So we have these assumptions that if you hire an older worker, they're going to get ill more often. And the COVID pandemic kind of exacerbated this, that if you're 50, you're vulnerable. I don't know that Mel looks very vulnerable to me, and we need to lock her in and not make sure she doesn't come out and talk to people. But this has had a lasting impact on the negative stereotypes that particularly our younger recruitment colleagues and HR colleagues have around age. And the reality with data is starkly different. And that came out last year from all the mental health charities as well, that showed that 1 in 3 under 30-year-old employee in the UK had taken at least 1 day absence for mental health last year. That number is less than 1 in 10 for over 55s. So a big significant shift in absenteeism. We also then look at the world of recruitment. So we work with some very high volume recruiters. So EE, who employ 20,000 people a year into their stores and their contact centres. Amazon, who hire 100,000 people a year into the UK and 500,000 people globally. Huge recruiters. Again, when we start to skew their efforts to opening up those talent pools to over 50s, to reskill. So Amazon's a great example. So up until the point we started prodding their board with a stick around the topic, all of their reliability and maintenance engineers across the UK were full-time, and all of them were under the age of 35. So everybody who's fixing the robots that bump into each other in all of their big distribution plants, all young people hired out of college that have done robotics. So we went in and looked at a distribution centre and looked, what does this role do? Well, they're fixing sprinklers, they're fixing robots. I mean, it literally is paradise for somebody who's currently tinkering in their garage, semi-retired, undoing an engine from a car, unpicking a radio and putting it back together again. And then we see large employers like BT who are about to embark on making 30,000 engineers redundant or retired early as they close down the 3G network. And we start to play Syllaback, for those of you that are old enough to remember it, and start matchmaking and going, well, why can't you reskill engineers? And why do these roles have to be full-time? Why can't they be part-time? And so that's one example, but what happens from the data is that when our clients open up their talent attraction to over 50s, those over 50s hires are 5 times less likely to leave role in the first 18 months. And pay does not form in the top 3 reasons why they will select a job. So it's not about the money. There are 3 driving factors that are much higher than money to over 50s. And in fact, 89% of over 50s will take a pay cut to change industry, to change role, do something more interesting that they've done that they don't know before, or to do something more purposeful, which perfectly plays into the space of a number of your departments where they can leave their job in financial services or in retail or wherever they are and come into the prison service or the care service or other parts of public service and feel that they are doing something different and giving something back for their career.
Brilliant, Lindsay. Again, I think you've highlighted the importance of data there, and I'm just looking at some of the comments. Samantha Mills reinforced that data is really important to kind of inform decision making. A really nice comment from Andy Aston. REE is really important. To put it into perspective, I've modelled at NDA the impact of all employees retiring at the point they reach state pension age from now until 2031. see 40,000 years of experience lead the organisation. My God, that's so compelling, isn't it? So I think that ROE, return on experience, has hit the spot there. Really, really important.
On that point around retirement, because this is a really important point, actually. So a lot of our time is spent analysing data of large workforces and forecasting it forward. So in a number of industries at the moment, and if I look at industries in the UK and some of our clients like Schneider Electric or Veolia or Barclays, so financial services, infrastructure, they already have in large proportions of their workforce over 50% over 50 in skilled roles. If we forecast any of our clients' workforces forward just 5 years, they typically see a 10% growth in their over 50s population, which makes that move to be predominant. And I had a very, very shining example of this just about 3 weeks ago when I was invited to speak to a global board of an investment bank. I shan't name them, but I will give you a scenario that how it played out. So I've been invited to talking because one of their leadership team was concerned around the fact that there's an aging population, they have a big presence across the Asian markets, across the US, as well as across Europe, but they didn't have an age strategy. But nobody seemed to think that this was an issue. This is a future problem. This is not a burning platform. This is not something we need to worry about because as I'm looking around, there's no older people. And so what happened was that they shared some key data with us, and they shared with us that actually they've only really got a millennial workforce, and they don't measure their workforce by age bands, they measure them by generations. So it's generations, they have 60% millennial, they then have 32% Gen X, and then they had literally single digit boomers and Gen Z. So in their mind, they're like, I can only see millennials. And so the fact that blew their mind was by 2031, so 6 years from now, our millennial population turns 50. So when we're thinking of 50-year-olds, we're still carrying these assumptions that they're grey-haired grandparents, they're boomers. They're not. They're already Gen X, and they will be millennials within 6 years. And so we forecasted forward their workforce, which they didn't think had any risk in it. And because they weren't measuring by age, they were actually employing the older element of the millennial workforce, which meant that within 8 years, 93% of their workforce were over 50. Because rather than hiring across all ages and 5 generations fairly smoothly and having a bit of a bubble, they were just hiring 40 to 50-year-olds in the peak of their career, and suddenly they all get to the same age at the same point. And so if you haven't done that kind of modelling, like the person who's written into the chat to see what does this mean, how do we add years to careers, how do we create 10-year glide paths into retirements and keep people into their 70s and beyond, then you really will be facing some cliff edges.
Thank you. Right, we're going to run a couple of polls, give you a little bit of a break, Lindsay. I'm going to head over to Charlotte. We've got 2 polls that we're going to run. We're going to get some insights from you should see them on the screen. So we've just answered these 2 questions. Just a little bit of time just to respond, and we'll just have a quick look at what people are saying. Another 30 seconds, if we can. Right, let's just have a look. What are we seeing? So does your organisation, Charlotte, does your organisation have an age strategy? 65% of you said don't know, 21% no, and 13% yes. So Lindsay, I guess you would be encouraging our people on the call to be just going back to their sort of departments to kind of push this, to see more more yeses, I guess, more
and know how to articulate it. You will be getting questions, how do we support everybody of every age in the organization? How do we attract, engage, retain, develop people of every age? And what's our position around age when people are hitting state eligibility for pensions, but not necessarily their own desired retirement age? You are going to be challenging with those questions. And so, having a strategy that's backed up with data around what is it we're trying to achieve, what's our vision. And I'll give you just one quick example as we then go on to the second question. So AXA, for example, in the UK, AXA's workforce in the UK is now aged 18 to 84. And their headline strategy is that you can thrive at any age and any life stage in AXA. And so they have a headline strategy, and then they have all details around that, around whatever work and life stage you are, there's a way that you can thrive within the AXA employment world. Back to you, Paul.
Love that. And then our second question, how well do you think your current age strategy supports a diverse and inclusive workforce? I guess no surprise here. 41% neutral, 12% poorly, at 9% well, and 6% very well. So 15% in total, well or above, but a lot in that neutral space, which kind of links back to the stat that we saw there in terms of whether there is an age strategy. So thank you, everybody, for kind of sharing your views there. I wanted to move on to the next question. We are flying, but we've got 10 more minutes, Lindsay.
Okay.
The next question is what are some of the changes that organizations need to make in order to rethink their approach to employing, retaining, developing, but also think about some of the policies that they've got? And Dan has made a really important comment related to the public sector, which is about the kind of retirement policies that kind of make people, almost force people to think that they have to retire. So retirement policies and kind of retirement sort of processes are a big factor. But what advice would you give to employers around the whole employing, retaining, developing, and policies, to really change and think differently?
Well, my backdrop's quite helpful here because, we have a solution called Me Redefined, which for the employer is an age intelligence platform, which gives them real-time data and sentiment about their midlife workforce. But for the employee, it's a career coaching, career transition, and life tool. So how do you navigate midlife? Interestingly, there are two key data points that are coming out of this, which is creating real change for large employers. The first is that 93% of over 50s feel unsupported by their employer in midlife. They feel that they're left to wither on the vine. Particularly if they're long service employees, it's like, well, you don't need to go on that training course because you've been here forever, and you're safe, you're not going to go anywhere. And so the fact that those people in their 50s are wanting to continue to work for at least another 20 to 25 years, they are seeing that their employer is not nurturing their careers, they're not opening up career transition, they're not developing them in the same ways around AI tools within the business that they are the younger cohorts that they're bringing in. And so there's a huge opportunity there to support people to navigate this new midlife, because as I mentioned earlier, this 30 years of life expectancy we've added means that people now in their 50s and 60s, they are the first humans on the planet to have the benefit of this extra life experience and life expectancy. So they don't have anyone to follow. They don't have a guidance. They just know that they feel different to what they were expecting to feel at that age. And as Mel said here, they're wanting to lean in, not lean out, but they're wanting to do different things. They're wanting to grow. And so the second thing that comes out from all of the users that run through this is that 92% would add years to their careers if they could have the opportunity to reskill or learn something new. So one of the biggest drivers to retirement is boredom. Just because I've been an accountant for 40 years does not mean I want to be an accountant for the next 20. I've got other things I can do. I might want to be a photographer. I might want to get into social media, or I might want to retrain into HR. I want to be a nutritionist. But we put people, as they get older, into a box that says that you can only do what you've always done. and we make these massive assumptions around them. And so we did a study, and I know you were maybe going to come onto this in a little bit, Paul, but I'm going to cover it now, which is the difference we see between public sector hirers versus private sector hirers. So we commission loads of research. We get census, we keep census wide in business, give us another 4,000 over 50s and do this and find this out. And one of the really interesting things when we cut our research by sector is that the most ageist stereotypes come from leaders and hirers within the public sector. So they are the most likely to discount an over 50s candidate because they believe that they are too expensive and are not want to take a pay cut to join the public sector. They have this assumption that, well, if they've been working in financial services, they're not going to take a massive pay cut and come and work here. So they don't even get to interview. They don't even screen them in. They call them overqualified or not a cultural fit, and they don't bring them in. And then likewise, they assume that that because you can afford to retire, you want to retire. So, okay, well, you're 55 and you've got this gold-plated pension, and so clearly you want to go. And so colleagues start asking, what are you going to do when you retire? And I can tell you from the thousands of people that write to us through our consumer platform, Life Redefined, is that they find it as offensive a question as I found all through my 20s and 30s, asking me, when am I going to have children? When am I going to have children? When are you going to have, do you not like children? So I had that for 2 decades. Thankfully, at 47, I'm finally reaching the point where no one's asking me that anymore. But we need to make that question around when are you going to retire as, as unexpected and as unacceptable in our workplaces as a stereotype as it is, when are you going to have children? And so until we start to shift some of these stereotypes, and so a lot of this, Paul, needs to come with training. So, the most challenged population within in any organisation we see is the squeezed middle manager. It's the people leader that's suddenly being asked to lead 5 generations of people and suddenly instinctively know how to motivate a 20-year-old and a 65-year-old and everybody in between. And they can't. It's not an innate human skill. It requires training, it requires structure, it requires intentional interventions from you as employers around how do you train people to attract the right breadth of talent, how do you then nurture them, and how do you support people of different ages with different desires from work.
And Lindsay, I know this is not strictly on the script, but I know you do a lot of kind of lobbying conversations with people in government. Presumably there has to be some change to the retirement, the way that we manage retirement in this country, given the stark statistics that we're living longer. As a country, we can't afford to be paying the sort of companies or private pensions and public pensions. We can't afford to be paying that at the age they start coming in. So do you think that change will come soon, or is that going to take some time?
I do think it will come in soon. I think it's always the reason why private enterprise is kind of solvent for it without being told to do it by government is that they know that for governments, it's a hot potato. When Macron tried to introduce it in France, there's, riots on the streets. So nobody wants to be the government that says it's unaffordable, but it is unaffordable, But the difference that I would make is that for the next 5 years or so, the people that are hitting their mid-60s, typically, the majority can afford to be retired. And this is the majority. There are still obviously, you have the greatest disparity in wealth in the over 60s, actually. So the poorest and the richest are in that group. But the majority can afford to be retired. They have the benefit of housing assets. They have the benefit of having some final salary pensions, perhaps in their background. And so for the majority of that cohort, they're choosing to work longer. They want to work longer. But in 5 years' time, the population hitting 50 and beyond will not have that choice. They will have been the generation like me who have had defined contribution pension schemes, which do not have anywhere near the same kind of power and value in their old. So they will not be able to afford to retire before their mid-70s. And then that's before we interlayer any kind of intersection. So I'm a woman, and on average, a woman when they hit their 50th birthday, their pension pot is 39% lower than their male equivalent. Yet they live longer. So the imperative that we have to get, and we support all of the female channels. So we have all of the job boards that we've owned, like workingmums.co.uk and Noon, and all of these midlife platforms where we've got armies of women in their 50s, where kids are going to university, or flying the nest, and they've not worked for 15, 20 years. And they are desperate to start their career. They want to learn, they want to grow, they want to be data scientists, they want to, be prison officers, they want to be engineers, they want to have the career start now. And they're told to go and apply for a job in Waitrose or B&Q. They're literally, it's like, well, they're really age friendly. And you've got these women going, oh my God, this is finally my time. I was too young in my 20s. I was then bringing up a family. This is my time. And I want to work for the next 25 plus years and grow a career. And I'm ruled out of your options because we use these terrible phrases in our lexicon, like early careers, which basically means unless you're under the age of 25, you won't apply, rather than just saying, let's just call them developing careers, and encourage everybody that's put themselves through Open University and other channels to come in to apply. And we won't have time now because I'll just keep banging on forever. But we have so many examples of organisations then who have embraced that and created these solving for these skills shortages, be that data scientists into Sainsbury's, where they've trained shelf stackers and forklift truck drivers to do it, be that, Amazon and reliability maintenance engineers, that, be that Virgin Media O2, who put a campaign out for women to retrain to be engineers in the home. And I can certify, because the lady who fixed my Wi-Fi just last month, who came in her 50s with all of her kit bag up the stairs, I said, don't mind me asking, how long have you been with them? She's like, 2 years. I said, and were you an engineer? She's like, no, I worked in Harvester as a waitress. I saw an advert on Facebook that said they wanted women engineers to go and do site visits for women that were at home, and they would provide all of the training. They'd provide me a van. They'd give me everything I need to know. And I love it. So there's so much opportunity if we just get out of our own heads of what these dated perceptions are that we have around what somebody in their 50s and 60s can do or wants to do.
Well, you've set us up perfectly for the next section, which is all about skills. So that was perfectly planned. But before we do that, we've got one final poll for your section. So Charlotte, if you could launch the poll, which is now on the screen. So what age-related challenges do you encounter in workforce planning? It's probably interesting.
Interestingly, while people are answering that question, our latest study shows, and the users through our cohort of Me Redefined, that less than 11% of over 50s want to retire. So they see no point in the future where they're not working at all. What they want to do is work less and live more. They want to travel more. They want more flexibility. They want part-time, but they don't really want this choice of working or not working. They want to have some element of work, be that paid, be that voluntary, in their life for as long as they're able to do so.
Interesting. Right, Charlotte, if we can just close it, and we'll just have a quick look at the summary. So 44% have said the skills transfer between generations. That's the biggest challenge there, followed by succession planning. And I think you drew that out there, Lindsay, getting organisations to really think about the impact of this and what that means to, skills and kind of roles across the organisation, and then retirement planning. I think retirement planning is critical there. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Can I just give one last point on that around the skills transfer? And because this is something that doesn't matter what organisation we're working with, whether they're skewing really young, like they're in the advertising sector or publicity, or whether they're skewing really older, like they're in engineering or an energy company. We are seeing some brilliant activities around skills transfer, but all of our employers refer to it as the deal. What's the deal? What am I going to give to this over 50s employee that means that they are going to want to help us train the next generation, or train our AI tool, and train our large language models? And so I'll give you one example to leave you on, which is with Schneider Electric. So they have an element of incredibly skilled engineers that are powering our nuclear power plants and the Ministry of Defence and all of these areas that, quite frankly, if they retire in their 60s, the lights go off and we're all a little bit done in. And so they've created a deal which is that they will continue to pay these engineers full-time pay, but they can go down to 3 days a week working on 2 conditions. The first condition is that they will take an apprentice under their wing and be fully responsible for their training. Fully accountable, fully responsible. And the second thing is that they'll get AI installed on their laptop to slow them down and ask them why they do everything they did. Why did you select that? Why did you choose that? So they are, over a period of time, explaining their 40,000 hours of knowledge into an AI tool to explain what it is. And they then have a deal that runs into people's 70s and 80s that enables them to work fractionally. So just one example there, but there are so many ways to cut it. Reverse mentoring is another very simple and easy way within the organisation.
Yeah.
And I will shut up now, Paul, and hand back to you.
Thank you. We will be coming back to you at the end, Lindsay. Thank you. Right, Sonia, over to you. As kind of Lindsay sort of set up for us, we're kind of shifting the focus now to look at, I guess, skills and, you know, what led you in particular in the work that you're doing at ONS to look at our recruit, train, deploy model. So first question is really if you can just kind of give us the background, the context in terms of what the drivers were, Sonia, for you going down that particular path.
Yes, of course. And Lindsay, I'm really impressed by your use of data, can I say, coming from the stats office. I run something called the Government Digital and Data Academy within ONS, and we have various approaches to attracting entry-level talent into government digital and data roles. I'm going to call that GDD from now on because it's too much of a mouthful. We've done in-house development programs where we've given people the chance to cross-train. We've done a lot of engagement with universities. We do a year in industry program and encourage people we take software engineers through that route. We've done open recruitments. So for instance, recently did a business analyst entry-level program, and we had 1,631 applications for 8 roles. So we try all different routes to do this. But we wanted to try something slightly different to get a more diverse group of software engineers into ONS. So we decided, I'm very fortunate that I worked directly to the head of profession, or did at the time, head of profession for government digital and data. And he was really supportive of us trying a slightly different approach. And then we started looking around at what was available, and then recruit, train, deploy jumped out as a really good option because it was going to reach the talent pools that we weren't reaching through traditional methods of either advertising on CSJ, civil service jobs, or going to universities. So that's how we got involved. We wanted to improve the diversity amongst our software engineers.
And just a little bit about those roles, when you call them software engineers, what sort of, just a minute on what that role entails, so we can just get a bit more context on that.
Okay, so when we started, we thought they were going to be pure software engineers, which is people who developers, coders, who also do testing and deployments. But what we ended up actually doing as we progressed through the RTD program, which I can talk a bit more about later, is actually we found that we had people who had a talent more aligned to being a cloud engineer, or other people who more their talent lay in being more on the automation engineering pipeline or platforms. So what we ended up doing was not shoehorning people into software engineering, but actually looking at their talent and their skills and finding the right fit for them. Because coming back to, for us, it is a return on investment. We wanted this to be successful. So what we didn't want to do was shoehorn somebody into a pure software engineering role, then actually find it wasn't really for them. They didn't enjoy it, so we looked at where their talents were and slotted them into the right places.
Right, thank you. You said that you felt that this approach, RTD, would give you a more diverse set of colleagues joining the business.
Yes.
So I wonder what barriers you faced when you were started to kind of talk to the organisation about this as a possibility, because it sounded like you were really up for it, you were keen, you kind of spoke to your boss. But what barriers did you face in terms of bringing this through and implementing it?
So the main ones were the internal commercial process. Sorry if there's anybody from commercial teams on the call. It isn't a cheap program. And therefore I needed to do some sort of forecasts into how much it was likely to cost us, what the chances were of actually retaining people at the end of it to make it a worthwhile program, and then getting that through the internal commercial process to go and spend the money, basically. Like I said, I didn't have to convince my boss. He was fully on board with it. But I can imagine in other organisations, you might need to do that persuasion piece as well as to the value of doing this.
And that kind of, because costs, commercials are really important in the climate that we are all operating in. It sounds like you were able to kind of get that business case sort of across the line. Was there anything in particular that you were able to draw out of that process to convince people that this, again, on the face of it, it might look more expensive, but it's still the right thing to do?
I think it was, I'm trying to think. It was, we're committed to diversity and inclusion within ONS as one of our strategic pillars. So what I was able to demonstrate was I could go out to PSR and do a commercial exercise, but that I would use when assessing which supplier to use through that framework, that we could build the D&I measures into it to make sure that we were likely to do the reach the right talent pools that we wanted to reach. So that was got a lot of support. And also the fact that if people didn't work out, so if they weren't suitable, or we weren't the organisation for them, public sector wasn't for them, then they had another opportunity to go elsewhere. We weren't committed to keeping them permanently. But we were convinced that we could, I was convinced anyway, that we could select the right people and we would have a really successful outcome. So I think there was a sort of risk, limited risk associated with it as well.
There's a question which I'm going to bring in now, Sonia, if you don't mind, from Kay Sims, which is, how do you hire at the end of the RTD? So we use RTD but have to advertise a fair and open role at the end, which brings a risk that the RTD folk are not the best on the day of the interview, so may not be retained. Is that something that you have to do as well?
Yes, and this was, I was actually going to bring this up as one of the barriers at the end. So the participants were on a 15-month, so they did a 12-week boot camp, being trained in the technologies that we wanted them to be trained in. It was absolutely fantastic. And Alexander Mann, so AMS, got the contract. And what was really key for us is that they were willing to work with us and tailor that 12-week boot camp to the technologies we needed. And we were involved in the assessment process throughout, in the initial selection and then the assessment, and then the final project, working out which would be the best type of work for the successful people to do. So that was really great. But as the programme progressed, as my teams had vacancies coming up, I had to be able to say to them, right, don't advertise it yet, because if you fill that post, when you get to the end of the programme, you're an RTD person, you won't have a post to be able to advertise to at least give them a chance to apply for. So basically, we needed to make sure we had 12. We didn't have thousands. We had a group of 12. We had to make sure that within our workforce plan, there were 12 vacancies that we could then advertise. And they did have to go through that open and fair recruitment. It was really tough for them because they'd been with us by this time for 18 months. They were integrated in the teams and making a really big difference to the teams. And it was very nerve-wracking for them to have to go through that for their team. And for me, as sort of the lead on the whole programme, we really, really wanted them to be successful. I promised them, so I went and had a chat to the group and said, look, I'm going to come along and do this talk and I want some feedback, and I will read some of the feedback out to you before we finish. But I said, one of the barriers for me that I'm going to raise is what somebody's put in the chat there about the fact that it's really, they have to go through this process at the end then to apply for a role. Some of them weren't the first past the post. Some of them ended up on a reserve list, but we built in time, we built in a few months. And as we all know, people end up leaving, so we were able
Sure.
to take some of the people off the reserve. But they live with that uncertainty for like 3 months of loving being with us. We wanted to keep them and hoping they got to the top of the reserve list when a vacancy came up. We kept 10 out of the 12.
Amazing.
2 of them chose, because of geographical locations, actually chose to take jobs elsewhere, because we have the 40% working had come in and they needed to be close to one of the offices. Out of the 10 we took them at executive officer equivalent, basically, when they were training. We had one who came in as SEO. She applied for an SEO board and got that. And then 4 came in as HEO and the other 5 came in at EO. So we had that good spread as well of grades. That's how successful it was.
So that's a really good example of how you use, the existing system to kind of make sure there was a fair and open process, but kind of manage the development of this program and the cohort, and kind of using the, I guess, as you said, the workforce planning to make sure there was the right vacancies there that potentially they could then apply for.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. And there's a comment, and I don't understand I think it's around the same thing from Samantha, around the commissioner's recruitment principles. Is that what we've just talked about, that kind of fair and open recruitment process?
Yeah.
We just talked about. Yeah.
I think 2 comments got put in from Kay and myself simultaneously on the same topic.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right. Sonia, brilliant responses there. We're going to just pause for a poll. So if I can ask Charlotte to run our poll, please. So does your organisation have future skills needs which aren't being met by fast stream graduate and apprenticeship programmes? So if you could just respond to that, please. Yeah, it looks like an overwhelming. There's still some responses coming in, but an overwhelming majority of you are saying yes, your organisations don't have, those future skills are not being met by fast stream graduate and apprenticeship skills. 58% of you saying that, and 38% are unsure. Again, that doesn't surprise me, given what we've heard from Lindsay around that sort of aging population skills agenda and how it's just been talked about by Sonia. So thank you for your responses there. Right, Sonia, let's go on to the next question, which I think you've talked about, but let's kind of ask again. How have you deployed? Is it just the one cohort you've done, or have you done more than one? So it's
just
one cohort.
Yes.
How have the deployed cohorts contributed to the diversity outcomes of your workforce, and what impacts this had on organisational performance? So you talked about the importance of diversity and inclusion at the outset. So did you deliver against what you wanted to set out at the beginning?
Absolutely. So out of the 12 that passed the assessment process and were offered a place with us, 4 of them were female engineers, which is higher than we normally get when we advertise for engineers. So that was really good, and all 4 of them have stayed with us. And in fact, one of them was the one who got the SEO post. So super proud. Some of them were career changes. So 2 of the females were career changes as well. So picking up Lindsay's point, they weren't over 50, I'll be honest, but they were people who had had a career in a different sector and wanted a change of career. And this opened up an opportunity for them that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So that was really good. And we had a very broad range of cultures as well. And that's worked really well. They bring new insights into the teams. They challenge the teams to think in different ways. Just bring that new thought process. In terms of integrating, they joined when we were all working remotely. So it was easy to integrate them in a team because everybody just joined as we're doing now, so they were working with their team on a daily basis. What we did for each of the people is they had a line manager who did what line managers do, check their flexi, allocated work. That tended to be the delivery manager for the project they were on. But we allocated them completely separately a technical buddy, which was somebody who was probably a grade or maybe 2 grades max above. So they could remember what it was like almost to be a new starter and to be, fresh into a role and needing to integrate into, and also learning their trade, learning about their coding or their automation or their cloud. And they were the person that they worked most closely with, would do things like their peer programming, would mentor them to get the technical skills that they needed. And then the line manager would do the line manager job, signing off holiday, signing off flexi, etc.
I love that. I love that approach, the tech buddy approach, because I can see how that can work really well. What sort of feedback did you get from those on the cohort? Presumably they found it really valuable, but was there anything in particular they said about those, what that buddy relationship gave them?
Anecdotally, we've talked to them, so we checked in with them every month to see how they were doing. So they would give us that feedback and say it's working really well, and not always did it go quite to plan. So sometimes they could be honest with us and say, actually, if the relationship with their buddy, or if their buddy wasn't perhaps giving them the support they were expecting and they needed more, then we could intervene. But generally speaking, they found it great to have somebody. It was a safe space, no stupid questions. They didn't have to go in front of the stand-up and say, I don't understand what I'm doing next, or I don't understand this ticket. They had a person they could go and talk through the technical side of it, and who would help them and coach them, and they were never made to feel stupid, which was really good.
And aside from the technical buddy and that kind of support they got from that side, was there anything else from an integration perspective that came out in terms of them embedding them in the wider workforce, and anything you reflect back on, and if you were to do this again differently, you would think about next time?
So one piece of feedback I have from one of the teams was that we did the boot camp, everyone did the same training. And one of the teams had one of the engineers, but they were on very niche, I'm going to use the word legacy technology. And then they basically had to retrain them in forget all that modern new technology you've learned. You're coming over to, legacy land, and we're going to have to retrain you. So we've had feedback that it would have helped in those circumstances if we'd then done some more tailored training specific to their technology. But not, I honestly don't think there were no issues at any point where any of the managers came to me or the buddies and said, this person isn't fitting in, or this isn't working, or, it was just generally worked really well. I've got, and I think you're probably going to ask me about this, about cross-skilling. I'm just going to read it rather than, So one of the candidates came back to me, and this was one of the career changes, and said, coming from a completely different professional background turned out to be a real advantage. I brought with me a wide range of transferable skills, especially in communication, problem solving and project management, which allowed me to thrive in a high-performing team. These strengths gave me the space to focus on developing the technical side of the role more quickly, as many of the softer skills were already second nature. And I thought, I'm not even going to try and reword that. She said it beautifully. So I thought I'll just read that out to you about how people come in from different backgrounds, can bring these different perspectives, but bring a lot of skills with them, which I can see Lindsay nodding. That's people in our 50s. We do still have lots of skills to bring. And then one of the other cohort, and this, as I've been gathering this, I've actually been quite touched. It's reminded me why I do the job I do. So he said, I asked about, being a different age or gender or culture. How have you found that? And he said, being a different age and cultural background to the majority of the team, I sometimes find myself thinking and having different answers to solutions from the team. Now, in all honesty, it's not correct all of the time, but it's always a different way of you to approach a situation, which I feel is beneficial as it opens a room to collaborate on new ideas and open the floor for discussion. And that's the sort of feedback I have from the managers as well, that having those fresh eyes, those different perspectives made them think differently and approach problems differently. So that, really, really positive.
Yeah, that's amazing feedback, and that kind of again goes back to that point around building teams with different people, different perspectives, different, thinking about difference in its broader sense. It really plays into that sort of, delivering greater collaboration, greater innovation. So perfect feedback. Sonia, I wonder if you could just, and again, I'm slightly going off script, but I wonder, there's been a lot of chat on the RTD model, and there's obviously interest in it. What advice would you give? So anybody on this call, another department who are potentially looking at this, based on your experience, what advice would you give a sort of a colleague who's looking to do this in terms of setting it up successfully from the start?
I can't recommend it highly enough. I think it was a really good program for us. And it's get involved all the way through. So we were allocated an AMS team who we work with. And we had weekly catch-ups. We helped them write the initial advert that they put out to attract the original people interested in the role. I think I was trying to look back at my figures, because we started this in July 23, and I had the last figure I could find was we had 199, or AMS had 199 applications. They then did the initial interviews, got it down to 65, and then 39 from the interview went through to an assessment, completed an online assessment. And then, so we only got involved at the advert stage. We let AMS do all that bit, getting us the right people. But then we had 26 people went through to the assessment day. And again, we were involved in that all the way through. So it was 3 AMS people, 3 ONS people. And we had a chat to the people. They were given a little problem to go and consider and come back to and give us feedback on. We dropped in, extra questions to see how they could react to challenge, or something coming in from left field, and we were involved in that. So it was really good that we didn't just say, oh, go and find us 12 people and send them over. So we built that relationship with them, and it was really hard then selecting. So when the 15 went to boot camp, because we only had 12 places, we allowed a couple of extra, because people drop out, people decide it's not for them. And then we actually got down to 14 completed the boot camp, and we were like, oh no, we can only pick 12 of them. And it was really hard because we built that relationship. But it did feel then that when they joined us, they trusted us, and when we put them into the various teams, because we have that relationship. And they weren't afraid, either the teams or the individuals, to come to us if there were any minor glitches or any queries. And we kept in touch with AMS every week initially, and then it sort of dropped off as we all got into our rhythm and everything was going okay. So I would just say, be involved all the way, support it, but get involved all the way. Work as partners.
Yeah, brilliant. A very strong endorsement of recruit, train, deploy in terms of developing new skills within ONS. Sonia, thank you so much for that. We're going to finish off on 2 polls, but before doing that, just a quick reminder, we've got some time for some more questions. So have a think about some questions you want to ask Lindsay and Sonia. Either put them in the chat, or I'll give you the opportunity to come off camera. But before we do that, we've got 2 more polls just to finish with. Thank you, Charlotte. So before today, were you aware of the RTD service line via PSR? And there's another one there. If you were aware, have you considered RTD and dismissed it as a viable option? So 66% of you were aware, which is good. 33% no. There's obviously an opportunity. Big majority of you so far never considered it. It's coming down. 66% currently never considered it. Yeah, so it feels like there is an opportunity to be looking at recruit, train, deploy as an option to develop or introduce skills within an organisation. Thank you again for inputting your thoughts there. So Sonia, again, thank you so much for taking us through that. It's really interesting and great to see the success you've achieved with that particular cohort. We've got 15 minutes, probably about 12 minutes for questions before we just need to close off. So I will open it up either to pop a question. There's a question that's come immediately in the chat. Questions in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up, I'm happy to come to you and we can talk to you directly. So from Samantha Lindsay, question for you. How do you calculate the ROE?
Yeah, of course. Great question. And it does also differ from every company and organisation we work with actually as to what they deem. But I'm going to give you two examples from the private sector to give you some food for thought around this. So if I wind the clock back about 2 years ago, we had a global consulting organisation, so one of the very big firms that you would know and recognise their brand, come to us with their problem, which is that they wanted to offboard their over 50s who they deemed to be expensive and hitting their senior years. And so the challenge they presented to us originally, what they wanted us to do was pre-retirement coaching and career transitions to enable them to offboard but not sue them, was the undertone. And so we encouraged them to look at the data and just check that they weren't going to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and is there any experience or outcomes from this individual that they need to understand from data before they do so. And so what we identified, because they hadn't actually even calculated the percentage of the population, we identified that actually 40% of their global consultants were over 50. This was a big chunk of their workforce. But those 40% generated 92% of the global revenues to that global consulting firm. So interestingly, when they had that data point, the task to us changed quite significantly, which was around the fact that we need to now retain these over 50s because they generate all the revenues. But how do we then retain them on a way that reduces their pay? So can we move them into more flexible and part-time roles, maintaining client relationships whilst they then upskill the next generation? So for that particular organisation, it was all around revenues. If I look at one which is a bit more on public record, so I can name the company because they've talked about this in the public space, it's Barclays. So Barclays originally came to us for their retail bank with a hypothesis, which was if they demographically matched their customer base, then they would have better customer outcomes. That was their starting hypothesis. They had intuition around it, but they hadn't done the data, they hadn't done the work around it. It was a big piece of work. And so their instinct all lies into what Sonia was talking about here, which is around the soft skills that people develop as we age. There's a concept called U-curve of happiness. And so we start as babies really happy, we then get sadder and sadder and sadder, and we hit the trough in our early 40s. And then as we hit 50, we get happier, 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 and happier. And this plays out in employee engagement studies where 9 out of 10 over 50s are happy at work, whereas less than 3 out of 10 under 30s are happy at work. And also what we develop as we age is this resilience and an understanding, because by the time we've hit our 5th decade, we've been through redundancy, bereavement, financial difficulty, health challenges, moving house, divorce, you name it, we've got the T-shirt. And so what Barclays wanted to do was see if they matched demographic customers with their complex queries. So if I'm ringing Barclays to report financial difficulty, so I'm struggling to pay my mortgage, or I'm going to report a bereavement, or I'm struggling to understand a complex product that I have, that I would get a better outcome. And what they saw, and we see this play out across every organisation, is that every single customer metric improved with age. So cross sales, retention, net promoter score, number of complaints, everything. The older the member of staff, and this is nothing about service, so these were new people they were hiring into Barclays, never worked in financial services. The only indicator was that they're over 50. That's the only indicator, and therefore they know better how to handle customer queries. So it will be different in every organisation. I was, been very fortunate to be with the leadership of Sainsbury's and Tesco in the last 2 weeks, and both of those organisations have said that their mission, as they continue to operate in the UK, is to equally demographically mirror the customers and the communities that they serve. So not only from an age perspective, but in where they have their store distribution, that they're mirroring the ethnicity, the gender, the entire dynamic of the population. They are a mirror to that population, and they see that play out in their return on experience because they watch customer behaviour and they watch customers seek out people who are like them in store to help with their queries as they do. So just two very small examples there, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a clue for what you could play into your sector.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. There was a question for Sonia, which I know you've answered, but I'm going to ask you just to talk about it a little bit more, if that's okay, Sonia. The question was, now that you've used RTD, has this become a formal part of ONS's workforce planning strategy going forward?
Thank you. So we use different approaches for bringing in software engineers. So we do year in industry for university students, as it says. We're also cross-training some internal people. That's our next programme, but we would definitely look at doing this again. But I think it's also worth mentioning, I just didn't type it all, that this isn't just for IT people. So RTD is there for all sorts of different disciplines like commercial, HR, I believe, that type of, so procurement. So there is, lots of opportunities. It's just I work in the GDD space and we try different approaches, but would do it again.
Great, thank you.
And then, Paul, I've been making some notes on a couple of just topics relevant to everything I've heard today that we've not touched upon. And so if there's a moment before the end, I've got a couple of things that I could just add in as well, from a question perspective.
Yeah, let me just check if there are, I don't see any other questions, but has anybody got another question? Either they want to come off camera or just want to post in.
I actually have a question for Lindsay, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia. Yeah.
So I've only worked in 2 government departments, and in civil service land, I'm relatively new. I've been in for 16 years. So my question is about, so the fact that your research has uncovered that the public sector is often perceived as ageist or age discriminatory. Personally, I haven't come across somebody I work. She celebrated her 45th anniversary in ONS last week. So I'm not saying how old she is, but she's obviously over 50, and she's inspirational. So I've not experienced personally. However, I've got friends now who are civil servants, and I was talking about going away on holiday. My girlfriends, all of them are career civil servants. One of them's already retired in her 50s. One of them's partially retired, and the other can't wait to retire. I'm the only one who won't be able to afford to retire until I'm about 87. So I'm just wondering, how much do you think the fact that there are lots of career civil servants who are looking forward to retiring is influencing is it learned experience, basically, that people think, oh, if somebody's over 50, they might not want to stay with us because they see people traditionally leaving at that age?
Yeah, they're putting their own perceptions onto other people's aspirations. There's a couple of threads in there I want to pick up on. So the research we've done was all around talent attraction. So when I say that the public sector is more ageist, it isn't around people that are long service. You have a lot of long service and older employees. It's that you're not hiring people. It's almost like you survive in the public sector, but you're not hiring. 25% of all hires should now be at least over 50 to match normal recruitment pipelines. And I would guess that they're not in all of your departments. You are skewing much younger. So it was around that hiring perception. Yeah, it's like people think that. But I've got a little story that I will share as to why I'm so obsessed with it when I'm not over 50. So I'm 47. 5 years ago, I was leading HR and recruitment outsourcer in the UK, and called the Curve Group. And I took a call from NatWest, who had an FCA regulated review of work that they completed in the 1990s. They had to unpick a decade's worth of advice and see whether they gave good advice or bad advice. And they determined that they needed actual bankers from the 1990s to do this work. They couldn't decision tree and complaint handle their way out of it. And so they rang me because they couldn't find anyone. They weren't getting applications through their job boards. They weren't allowed to hire alumni because the FCA mandated they'd be marking their own homework. They'd recognise the names in the case files. So they rang me because my early career was in banking, and then obviously I understood the world of recruitment. And I still have my Barclays mobile phone number from the 1990s when I worked for them. And so I set about ringing ex-colleagues of mine who I knew were long retired to understand if they wanted to come back to work as a contractor through my business into this project for NatWest. And in 8 weeks, I hired 400 people out of retirement. It was an almost 1-in-1 hit rate. Everybody I spoke to could afford to be retired. They were a bit like some of your friends, Sonia. They were crossing off the days on the wall calendar of, countdown of when I go, screw you, work, I'm never coming back. I can do what I want. It's going to be holidays. It's going to be jazz hands and fun times. And the reality of that, 400 times, which I've now expanded to thousands and thousands of cases of people, is that retirement is a rainbow. It has a wonderful beginning. The first 6 months are undoubtedly blissful. You can do what you want. You can holiday. You can get fit. You can learn the piano. You can see your pals. Or you can do up your house. All of that fun stuff. The second 6 to 12 months becomes a bit more repetitive. You're like, well, I know I can get the meal done and have a lovely dinner on a Wednesday night, but it's not quite the same as a big blowout on a Friday night when I've earned it and I'm feeling like I can have another holiday, but I'm not that tired anymore, and the airport's a bit of a hassle, so I don't do it. And by the time they're hitting the 12 to 18 month point, they're crashing down at the bottom of the rainbow and going, I'd focused on retirement as the destination. I hadn't spent any time planning what I was going to do 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for the next 30 plus years. And so what comes at the bottom of that rainbow is the highest divorce rates on record in our country for over 50s. So they work out that they've spent evenings and weekends with each other, and actually they don't really want to spend 7 days a week with each other. They recognise that actually everything they thought they hated about work, they miss. The ability to have structure to the working week, to have purpose, to have someone need them, to have a work wardrobe of clothing that's different, to be somewhere, to have that adrenaline buzz of the morning. And their social network that comes from meeting people and working with people from diverse perspectives, what you wouldn't get in your normal day-to-day. And so that was the very first report I commissioned, Sonia, which was the Unretirement Uprising. I wanted to see whether these 400 people were outliers. And it turned out I did then 4,000 people, and it was overwhelming that no, we are all like lemmings, that we are dropping off of a cliff, following this structure of retirement, thinking it's what happiness lies at the end of it. But it doesn't. What lies at the end of it is invisibility, often depression, particularly for men, and a lack of purpose and focus. What we also then see from the science that comes from this is
Can I just give you another one minute on this?
Yeah.
Just finish off.
The last thing I'll just say is that the longer that you work, the longer you live. So work is really good for our health. So if you add 10 years onto career, you will age healthier for those 10 years than stopping work. So feel free to get me on a pedestal and have a chat with your mates, Sonia. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight.
I'm glad I don't want to retire.
Lindsay, thank you. A brilliant way to conclude us.